Hey guys, it's Istebrak. Today I'm going to be looking at my two most recent painterly portraits, and I wanted to talk a little bit about texture and the brush set that I have that I used for it. This is the brush set that's available in my store. And a lot of the brushes as well that I've used here are just some basic brushes that I have that I've customized, combined between Photoshop brushes and some random texture stamps that I find, like of a rock, and I do a dual brush on Photoshop brush settings. But really the point is, with all that texturally technique, a lot of students really forget the fundamentals. So it's really important that when you are going in with that painterly feeling, a lot of it is happens at the end. Early on in the painting, you need a really versatile brush. So it isn't about the brush at all. It never has been. And when we use our brush and we're layering and layering values, as you see here, and going in and adding all these details, a lot of the texture gets painted away. And you probably noticed this if you wanted to go for something painterly. So the real painterliness is artificial. It actually happens at the end of the painting. When the painting is done, you go in and you fake the painterly texture. You fake it. You go in there and you leave some deliberately unblended behind. And that's pretty much what I've been doing. That's pretty much what I do, is that I go for it. I render as much as I need to. I don't try to preserve too much brushstroke, like that raw brushstroke grain that's left behind. I don't try to preserve it too much, because if I get too overwhelmed with that or too busy with that, I will forget about fundamentals. And over here, everything that I'm doing right now in this time lapse is all about the fundamentals, trying to capture the most important light spots, the most important dark spots. As you know, if you watch my videos, light spots and dark spots are the most important thing to establish with a large brush early on in the painting. It proves for an efficient completion. It creates a nice plate for detail for the last hour or 30 minutes of the painting. And I removed color deliberately because I wanted to focus on form only and see what I can do with my brush. I did want painterly, that's the thing, and that's what you'll notice. I wanted a painterly look in my brush use, and I realized through this study and through many other studies that you can't get that texturally feeling if you want a completed portrait or partially completed portrait and you want to have raw brushstrokes from the beginning. So if you want to preserve your brushstrokes from the beginning, not blend them out, you will have an incomplete portrait. It's just like a trade-off is what you have to have. So you see I'm blending away a lot of stuff, and I'm deleting a lot of stuff, and I'm layering many brushstrokes together, and I'm messing around with values, as you just saw. And still, the brushstroke is not the more important thing. The more important thing is leaving the brush large. You can use a brush with a grain on it, that's fine, but know that you will not be, you should not expect yourself to have really, really strong brushwork before it's time for you to finish with the fundamentals and the core shadow and the cast shadows and the detail and all of that important stuff. So always remember that. Always remember that it's not about the brush strokes. It's not about the glamour. It's not about the sparkles. It's not about the glitter that comes with all of this. It's still the same old story, the same old thing that the same old mantra that I cover in my work. It's all about being able to develop a good skeletal structure and preserving the geometry of the skeletal structure and dressing it with flesh and muscle, knowing when to blend and bring in gradients and knowing when not to blend and preserve geometry. That's the key. That's the ultimate key. Balancing your detail and making sure you're not jumping into high contrast too soon. If you depend on contrast too soon, you will eventually reach a point where you have like really muddy values and really muddy colors when you transfer into color. So leave contrast as the final frontier. If you really need that read, go for detail created through edges first. And edges are not going to be in your vocabulary. You're going to have it's going to be lost in translation for you, really, everything that I'm saying, unless you're going in and trying some form studies for yourself. So all those people who say, yeah, I don't need to learn how to render perfectly, I don't need to learn how to detail perfectly, all I really need to do is just study very basic stuff if I want to go for that painterly look. Painterly can't happen unless you know the fundamentals. You can't break the rules unless you learn them. All those professionals who make those amazing portraits that read with such high realism, with such low effort brush wise, that's actually a lot of effort in there. It looks like a little bit of effort because it's been Sorry, that's my phone. Ignore that. But yeah, because it's been kind of diluted, and you take steps down from pure realism. You take steps down from a lot of stuff in order to leave some of the rules behind. So the stuff that looks good after you take away purely blended, after you take away hair detail, after you take away lash detail, the stuff that stays behind that looks really, really good is the sweeping brush strokes that cover a lot of space and give a quick read without the excess detail. So that's the stuff that's left behind, the general strokes that cover a great deal of physics in one specific group. So if you've noticed, I'm really, really very, very cautious and tedious about these shadows on the eye sockets right now. And these eye socket shadows are what's left behind that looks good, part of the rules that you can't break. I've broken the rule with the lips. The lips are really, really underdeveloped. The eyes aren't really that realistic, to be honest with you. The eyebrows are completely underdeveloped. There is no other detail. There is no glamour. There are no props. There is nothing sparkling. I've completely omitted pores and anything to do with skin texture. I've just pretty much left that to the grain of the brush. So the stuff that is left behind is the physics, is the light on form, the density of the object that's revealed by the strong light source revealing the shape. A lot of people ask me how I pull it off, how I uh, show all of this form without showing much form, and it's about the subtle gradients that you do have. So there's a lot of stuff that you can't blend, and there's a lot of stuff that you should blend. Mostly the blending that's happened right now, it's not really blending, it's like a layering that I eventually made look like blending. So look at the chin and move up into the nose. It's very dark. It looks like there's a beard area. That's something you can't break either, because this face is essentially a sphere, and a sphere needs that half shadow that leads to the Terminator. So any detail that you add later means nothing if there's no core shadow covering half the body of the sphere. And that's one of the things that stays left behind that you can get all crazy and painterly with. You also notice a grain on either side of the cheek, on the edges of the portrait, on the edges of the positive space. That's just sharpen tool. I just use sharpen tool to sharpen some of the texture in the brush. And that also led to a more painterly feeling. So when you think painterly, how to do painterly anything, it's all about the illusion of an unfinished painting. It's really a finished painting. We're just creating the illusion of an unfinished painting by leaving behind some detail and sharpening some edges just a little bit more than they have to be, and everything else is just basics. I didn't, get really lazy and forget to place a pupil. The pupils are still perfectly spherical. The iris is still perfectly spherical. This is still realistic. Just because it's painterly doesn't mean I omit those physics. Those physics need to be left behind. So anatomy is one of those things that if it's painterly and it's bad anatomy, then it's just a bad painting. But if it's painterly but really good anatomy under there, you can tell through all those messy brush strokes that the anatomy is good. That's when you'll have painterly. So in summary, painterly doesn't mean bad anatomy. It doesn't mean bad physics. It doesn't mean bad form. It doesn't mean you don't have to study form. You still have to study a lot of form. It's not an excuse to learn less. It's an excuse to learn. It's a drive to learn more, to cover more knowledge as much as possible. Paintings happen because of speed as well. So if you want to paint more form and cover more anatomy in a shorter amount of time, you end up with a painterly painting. But for those who want to spend hours on the painterly painting, trying to create that artificially sped up feeling in the process. Again, you still have to think about the knowledge aspect of it. Just because an artist is doing this really quickly doesn't mean it's easy. They're doing it quickly because of how many studies and mileage and how much mileage they have behind all of this. So in summary, really, don't stop doing your studies. If you want to go for painterly, wait a little bit longer. Work on some form studies. There's a very distinct pyramid shape in the nose. There's a very distinct spherical shape in the forehead. There's a very distinct cube shape in the body of the head, on the sides of the head as the temples and leading to the chin. If you don't have a good hold and knowledge and familiarity and practice language with all of these forms, with all of these basic forms, you won't see them in a photograph that you're trying to use in order to pull off this painterly feeling. How else are you going to pull off so much speed and so much time if you don't have geometry to help you? So geometry is a memory tool, if anything. Remembering cubes, remembering spheres, cylinders, it's actually a better way and a faster way to remember basic physical rules. If you don't have a verse language in geometry, when you go in to try to paint something quickly, and not just quickly, paint it well and quickly and leave behind those pretty brush strokes, you'll end up over rendering where you shouldn't. You'll end up bringing in detail. You won't know which rules to drop. You won't know which ones to preserve. So as you can see, I preserved core anatomy and function in anatomy. So eyes have to be spherical in order to function. I preserved the core shadows of the spherical shape of the head along with the side shadows of the cube of the head and the dome of the forehead. So you can drop stylistic and excessive detail, but you can't drop physics or anatomy. Any of the sciences, you can't drop them. They're still there. And I'm using a lot of sharpen tool to bring out the grain that was lost and all that over blending. Not really over blending, just the necessary amount of blending. And it all led to this painting. So it can seem very complicated. I know I make things look much easier than they really are, but mileage is one of the, it's that maybe the last thing we talk about when it comes to how to improve, just doing enough. I know everyone hates that, draw enough, but it is one of the most important things to remember. I know there's a lot of sciences and ways to help you learn faster, but sometimes it's not about faster. There's no way to speed up. There's no way to gauge how much time is left for you before you get to a level that you like. It's a given, though, that you do have to invest some patience and some longer hours and a couple of months at least, at least weeks in painting the geometry of one part of an anatomical structure or muscle group before you perfect it. And that applies to all schools of thought and all kinds of stuff. You have to learn all the rules to learn how to break them. In order to paint something texturally and unfinished, you have to know how to finish a painting. And that's it really for today. Thank you all for your support. You guys are growing, and I can't believe a lot of you are here and you're just supporting me for what I do. I'll see you guys next month. Thank you all very much. Bye bye.